This week on the show, we're going to be talking to Petra about the NetBSD Foundation and how they operate and assist NetBSD behind the scenes. That plus a lot of news about the pending 11.0 release of FreeBSD and much more. Stay tuned for your place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 162, The Foundation of NetBSD, recorded October 5th, 2016. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And glad to have you all with us this week. It's going to be an exciting week. I know it's fall's finally here. We got new releases. Matter of fact, big release for FreeBSD is just around the corner. We got some releases in the BSD bits we'll get to. And MeetBSD is happening soon. So I'm excited. This is a good time of year. And my birthday's in October. So it's a good month altogether. So good stuff. But I guess the big thing people have been waiting for is 11.0 release of FreeBSD. But we have some kind of early teaser what's new coming out. So you want to tell us about what's going on with EC2 there, Alan?
So over on Colin Purcell's blog, he's got some updates on what's new with EC2 in FreeBSD 11. So he says FreeBSD 11 release is just around the corner, and it will bring lots of, a long list of new features and improvements. Far too long to list in a blog post, but he says I think that some of the most important improvements to FreeBSD 11, in particular noteworthy for EC2 users, and he built a list here. He said first, the EC2 console screenshot functionality now works with FreeBSD. This provides VGA-style output as opposed to traditional serial port, which EC2 has exposed as the console output for the past decade. And it's useful largely because the VGA output becomes available immediately, whereas the serial port output used to lag by several minutes.
Sure, that would be annoying.
This improvement is a simple configuration change. Older releases don't waste time writing to the non-serial console because it was never there until Amazon added the support recently. So if you have an older release of FreeBSD in Amazon, he has the lines here. You put in your loader.conf, basically setting console equal com console and boot multicons equals yes, and it will print to both consoles that way instead of just the serial or just the VGA. Or if you're using, if you install the new 11 release image when that comes out, it's already pre-configured to do both.
Nice.
He says the second notable change is support for EC2 enhanced networking. So this emulates an Intel 82599 NIC, which is basically Intel's 10 gigabit SFP NIC. So if you're running on the C3, C4, R3, I2, D2, or M4 instances, excluding the M4.16x large, this provides increased networking throughput and reduced latency and jitter, since it allows FreeBSD to talk directly to the networking hardware rather than using Xen paravirtualized interface. So basically, they're doing PCI pass-through with SIROV, basically to divide up this networking card and give a virtual version of it into each, a physical slice of it into each VM. So you're basically talking directly to the real hardware, but in an isolated way so that NIC can actually be shared with other VMs. But it means that you're not talking to a fake NIC generated by Xen, you're talking to the real hardware, and so the networking performance is much better. He says,
that's one extra layer you have to go through. That's good.
He says, getting this working took much longer than he had hoped, but the final problem turned out to be not be in FreeBSD at all. It was tickling an interrupt routing bug that was in the version of Xen used on EC2, but Amazon has since updated to resolve that. They say, unfortunately, FreeBSD does not yet have support for the new elastic network adapter, enhanced networking, that Amazon uses on the P2 and X1 instance families and on the M4.16x that we talked about a minute ago. So he's hoping to have a driver for that in time for FreeBSD 11.1. The third notable change is the improvement to EC2 disk throughput. This comes thanks to enabling indirect segment IOs in FreeBSD's BlockFront driver. While support was present in FreeBSD 10.3, it was turned off by default due to performance anomalies on some EC2 instance types. Those EC2 performance problems have been solved by Amazon, and disk I/O performance on EC2 on FreeBSD 10.3 can safely be improved by removing the hw.xbd.xbd enable indirect equals 0 from loader.conf. So if you have FreeBSD 10.3 on Amazon, there's a setting in loader.conf that's slowing it down to make sure it didn't cause problems. That problem's been fixed by Amazon, so you can remove that and get your speed back. Or if you build a new instance based on FreeBSD 11, it'll be fast by default. And he says,
Very nice.
finally, FreeBSD now supports all 128 CPUs of the X1.32 extra large instance type.
Ooh.
This improvement came thanks to two changes. First, the FreeBSD default kernel was modified in 2014, actually shortly after MeetBSD, where we discussed this, to support up to 256 CPUs instead of just 64. But this resulted in a fixed size section of pre-allocated memory being exhausted early in the boot process on systems with more than 92 processors. So he says, a few months ago, I changed the value of that predefined memory area to auto-tune so that FreeBSD can now boot and not immediately panic out of the box on such large systems. So while we changed the limit of the number of CPUs, there was a chunk of memory that we allocate a structure for each CPU out of, and it wasn't big enough to actually allocate that many CPUs. I think it depends a little bit on the hardware, but anyway, that's fixed now.
Wasn't there some concerns about performance, though, when you started getting up into that range of CPUs?
There's some problems with CPU contention, whereas for the scheduler and so on, where it has to take a lock on each CPU, there are some issues, and there's work ongoing to work on that. Because I think even with just like 64 or 72 CPUs, it was sometimes faster to disable some of the CPUs as far as getting the build done with like Petra, because there was some contention on certain locks and so on with so many CPUs trying to get that lock that it actually was faster to have fewer CPUs. But MJG at FreeBSD has been working on that kind of stuff and made quite a few improvements. Apparently, he's got the first 20,000 ports out of a port spill down to 6 hours on a machine he has.
Man.
And then it spends about 20 hours on the last 6,000 or 8,000 things.
Sure.
The tail end.
Well, you start having like the web kits that take hours, and
Although I just showed him the make jobs setup. You can, in pooterware.conf, you can give it a list of package names where it should allow it to use more than one core. Like we do that for like LLVM and OpenJDK and a couple other outliers that were slowing down our builds a lot.
We have about a dozen that we do that with as well. I think like ParaView's one, and the OpenJDKs, WebKits, Qt, some of those.
Yeah, I have like LLVM star, a couple other ones too. Anyway, finally, Colin says, I think FreeBSD EC2 users will be happy with the FreeBSD 11.0 release, but I'd like to end with an important reminder. No matter what you see on FTP servers in EC2 or available via FreeBSD update, the new release has not been released until you get the GPG signed email from the release engineer. This is not a theoretical point. In my time as a FreeBSD developer, I've seen instances of last-minute release rerolls happening due to problems being discovered very late. So the fact that you see the bits doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready to be downloaded. I hope you'll look forward to FreeBSD 11.0, but please be patient. Yeah.
Very cool.
Because I think we talked about it last week, but there's a reroll is happening.
There's still, some security stuff happened right at the last second.
OpenSSL did a patch right as the release was trying to roll. So they stopped the presses, do it all, go reroll the release, and then OpenSSL was like, actually, that patch we just gave you introduces 2 new flaws, so you might not want to use that one.
Great timing, folks.
And so on.
So what's our next story here? We got some more EC2 instance stuff.
Yeah, so a minute ago when we were saying don't jump the gun and install the update too soon, upgrading Amazon EC2 instances from FreeBSD 10.3 to 11 before officially released results in a hang at boot and your instance is dead.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So as if to underscore that last point there, a last-minute bug was found on Sunday night. Colin and I were up till 4:30 in the morning trying to figure out what the hell was going on there.
Oh, man.
But yeah, so a user reported that they used FreeBSD update to upgrade their EC2 instance from 10.3 to 11.0 and noticed that it just hung during boot. Now they managed to boot another instance attached to the disk and make some changes to get it booting again. But they weren't sure what had happened. So Colin fired up a couple of instances and started playing with things and found that, yes, if he did FreeBSD update, it broke, but he narrowed it down by just taking his 10.3 image, swapping the loader for an 11 loader, and then it would break as well. So it wasn't the whole operating system. It was just changing that one file caused it to have a problem.
Oh, no.
Since I had done a lot of work in the loader recently, Colin and I were talking, and we decided the best approach was to build a version of the loader with a lot of the extra debugging stuff enabled. And then I even added a bunch of extra printfs and so on to it to try to figure out at what point during this process the freeze was happening.
How far are we getting?
Yeah. So Colin and I worked late into the night, but eventually found, when we have the debugging turned on, so it's printing out a line every time it reads from the disk. And it's saying, reading this many sectors from this spot on the disk into this pointer in memory. And we see all these, and they're, what we expect, reading bits from the disk and putting them in memory. And then there's one where it's reading to a really low memory address, which seems weird. Unlike most of the other reads, which were up, high in memory, this one was at like 590 kilobytes or something from the beginning of memory. So that's below the 640 kilobytes. And in general, it just seemed to be very near the very edge of the 640 kilobyte barrier.
Sure.
So that initially distracted us for a while as we were trying to figure out what was going on there. But that was just being read into a stack variable instead of a memory allocation on the heap.
Red herring.
So a little bit of red herring there. Although it did actually tell that was where the problem was. It just wasn't because of where it was being put in memory.
Sure.
So with even more debugging added, it was determined that the problem actually was my Gelly boot code that I wrote.
Uh-oh.
When reading so to tell if a partition is Gelly encrypted, it reads the very last sector of the partition and looks for the metadata. And if it doesn't find it, it knows it's not Gelly and it boots normally. And if it does, it prompts you to decrypt it.
Sure.
But when reading the last sector for each partition to determine if it's encrypted, in the case if the partition is not 4K aligned and the partition butts up against the end of the disk, the formula used to calculate how to read 4 kilobytes in case it's a 4K sector disk wasn't quite right. So it took the byte number of the last sector, the start of the last sector, although in the loader, the sectors are always 512 bytes. It doesn't know that some disks are 4096. And so we take that and we round it down to the nearest 4096 and then read 4096 bytes, which works fine on all of my computers and in my virtual box and everywhere. But on these Amazon EC2 instances that are 512 byte and happen to just be an odd number of sectors, that doesn't. So when you back off, when you round down, you're actually only subtracting like 2560 bytes. And so then if you're only 3 kilobytes from the end of the disk and you try to read 4 kilobytes, you end up trying to read past the end of the disk.
Sure. And get some sort of error, I assume.
Yeah. So the formula rounds the last sector byte address down to the nearest 4096, reads 4096 bytes. Then that buffer is examined to determine if the partition is encrypted. And if it doesn't find the metadata at the beginning of that 4K chunk, it looks at the last 512 bytes of that 4K chunk. Because if it was a 512 byte disk, that's where it'll be. However, normally this isn't a big deal, right? The BIOS will just return an error saying, hey, that's an invalid address to read from. The loader will maybe retry 3 times because when it gets an error, but then it'll give up, move on, and you boot normally. Like, I purposely caused this to happen on my laptop after by like telling it to read a megabyte past the end of the disk, and it worked perfectly fine. It didn't even slow it down. Now, when we ran into this, a similar problem to this happened when we did the block cache in the loader. When we made it do a read ahead, sometimes it would read past the end of the disk. And on some people's computers, this would cause it to slow down a lot. like 30 seconds or so. Basically, because
that's significant. That's noticeable.
the loader would do the read, it would fail, the BIOS would retry a bunch of times, and then finally return the error, and then the loader would try it again, and then a third time. And so it was causing this delay. And so people were like, they're getting this huge delay during boot, and it does some stuff, pause, then do some stuff, then pause. And so we've basically solved that problem in the boot cache, the block cache stuff, but in Geli, we were having the same problem. So from that, we know that most computers will continue to boot fine. Some with bad BIOSes will take longer to boot, but will eventually boot. But it turns out on Amazon EC2, when you try to read past the end of the disk, the instance just hangs.
Oh, man.
Colin speculated this might be actually on purpose by Amazon to keep you from doing that and possibly reading into some other user's disk or something. Or it could just be a bug in Zen or in QEMU. It's especially interesting if this allows you to crash things on their side. Just go around.
Oh, man.
Let's break the cloud by using FreeBSD's bootloader.
Yep. Whoops.
Yeah. But yeah, because Amazon EC2 instances hang. So this bug has existed for 6 months now. But, a comedy of different factors meant that it was never detected. Because most installations now are 4K aligned because we made changes to the installer over the last couple of years to do that. Nobody misses if you round off the, if you run gpart show on your disk, you'll see there's a little bit of free space at the end of the disk, like 3.5 kilobytes of space that didn't.
Yeah, I want my kilobytes back. Not a big deal.
Yeah. So in that case, even if the partition's not 4K aligned, if there's a little bit of free space at the end of the partition or whatever, then it works fine because you're reading into this unused space instead of past the end of the disk. So most people didn't see it because of that.
Sure.
And then even the EC2 snapshots of 11, like all the developmental snapshots and so on, they all work fine because it uses a newer disk layout that is 4K aligned and doesn't have this problem. So even if you built a fresh FreeBSD 11 image on EC2, it works fine because the disk image is 4K aligned. But the old 10.3s aren't. And so when you upgrade them, you can run into this problem.
Sure.
So yes, nobody's been able to cause this problem on real hardware because normally it would just silently be ignored. And even if it wasn't, you're more than likely your hardware is going to have been installed with the installer and not have this problem. But Amazon did. So I committed the fix to head yesterday morning. And it'll be merged in the next couple of days, and we'll do an errata notice. So this will not hold up the release. The release is going to go forward. But you'll be able to download this fix via FreeBSD update. So if you're an Amazon EC2 user, or if you're worried that your hardware might have, might react badly to reading past the end of the disk if you don't have 4K aligned disk, then you should wait until the errata notice comes out, which will be probably at most a couple days after the release, if not at the same time.
Do you know, is that going to be -P2 or is
I think it'll be -P2. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you just wait until the errata notice is out to run FreeBSD update on your Amazon EC2 instances, they'll get upgraded with the fix and be fine. So not much to worry about. Just if you're using EC2, be aware of this. Colin's put out the message. If you're using FreeBSD on Amazon EC2 and you're not paying attention to Colin's tweeting or the FreeBSD cloud mailing list or his blog or something, you probably should, because it's the best way to find out about this stuff.
Yeah, that's important.
The FreeBSD-cloud mailing list is very quiet, so you don't have to worry about, you should subscribe to it because you're not going to get flooded with email. It's actually one of the nice quiet lists. It's relatively new, so it doesn't even get much spam yet. Of course, I've just ruined it by saying that, but anyway.
Of course, there it goes. Everyone's immediately signing up.
Yeah.
And
but
hey.
Like I said, if you run gpart show on your disk and you'll see there's a little bit of free space at the end, then you're probably fine and won't be affected by this anyway. Although, like I said, most hardware just works anyway, and so it's not a big deal.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Well, hey, you looking for your piece of OpenBSD history? Well, at the recent G2K16 hackathon over in Cambridge, UK, They had 40 OpenBSD developers all came together and put pen to paper, and they signed 5 copies of the new 6.0 release, which that's pretty cool. We got pictures of it if you want to take a look at the Undeadly article. But each of these is going to be auctioned off on eBay with the proceeds going to benefit the OpenBSD Foundation. So the first auction's actually already ended, and that first set went for a whopping $4,200.
Wow.
Which, yeah, I know, right? That's I don't have that kind of disposable income, but that's pretty cool. But there's a next set that's already available. It's currently up at about $3,000. So it may have already changed since I wrote the notes, actually, but it's at $3,000 as of a couple hours ago. So dang. Very, very cool. But of course, we got to remind you, get your bids in soon. They're going to auction off other sets as well. So a total of 5 of them. So the first 2, second one's going. You still have 3 more you could potentially bid on. Of course, these are extremely unique. I mean, the odds of getting the same 40 developers in a room together and signing a new .0 release, I mean, this could be a once in a lifetime thing.
Yeah.
So
I remember
if you,
BSD Can a couple years ago did this with like a T-shirt or I think it was a racing shirt or something, and got a whole bunch of people to sign it.
Yeah. These are opportunities that just don't come by all the time. So if you want this, if you want your little piece of OpenBSD history, we have the links in the show notes. You can find them. They're over on eBay, and definitely get over there and bid on that. Additionally, if you're just starting out your OpenBSD collection, we have a nice image we can show you here to make you a little envious of what somebody else has. I don't know if you could show that on the screen here, Alan, and let people see.
Somebody's got their collection.
Yeah, if you're a collector, like, you got to have this one in your set. I mean, this is like the Babe Ruth baseball card of OpenBSD releases. This is pretty cool. Okay, so next up we have what typing Control-D really does on Unix. So have you ever used a Control-D to generate an EOF? Yep. I'm trying to think. If you use like the mail command.
Or send mail, or even just if you're running like Perl or PHP and tell it to interpret the console, and then you type in the whole script and then Control-D when you're done. That's
right. Well, Chris Siebenman has posted a little look at this on his blog. It kind of lets us know it may not be doing exactly what you think. But he kind of sums it up there, though. He says, typing a Control-D actually causes the TTY driver to immediately finish a read. But then he goes on to explain what that means. He says, normally doing a read from a terminal is line buffered inside the TTY driver. Your program only wakes up when the TTY driver sees the new line, at which point you get back the full line. He said, note this buffering is distinct from anything that your language's I.O. system may be doing. He said, typing a Control-D, however, causes the TTY driver to stop waiting for a new line and immediately return from the read with however much of the line has been accumulated to date. So if you haven't typed anything on the line yet, there's nothing accumulated, and read, of course, is going to return 0 bytes, which is also conveniently the signal for an end of a file. If you've typed something, the program will get it. But because it doesn't have a trailing new line, the program's own line buffering may take over and keep reading to get to the rest of the line. He said other programs will immediately process the partial line with no buffering, and he said cat is one example of this. He said once you've typed Control-D on a partial line, that portion of the line is now immutable because it's already been given to the program. He said most Unixes won't let you backspace over such partial lines. Effectively, they have now become output, not input. He said that modern shells, however, are not good examples of this because they don't do line buffered input. To support command line editing, they switch terminal input into an uninterpreted mode. So they get a raw D and then can do whatever they want with it, and they can let you edit as much of the pending line as you want. Very interesting. But of course, fascinating stuff. It's interesting to see behind the curtain exactly what's going on with your program's buffering and how it's interacting with the TTY driver. But I wonder if there's any unique breakage you could cause with this, knowing how that works, Alan. Like, I have to go try that now.
What I'm more interested in is, what was he doing when he discovered this and decided it had to be written up?
Yeah. And what made him curious enough to go, I need to go look and see what that's actually doing. Like, what kind of program were you writing, or what were you doing? That's amazing, though. Good stuff.
Apparently,
a good find.
So. Accidentally wound up reading from standard input when he didn't expect to be.
Right. No, that's definitely good stuff. So if you find more stuff like that out there floating around the net, send it over. We like to hear those. That's just a neat thing I don't think many of us were aware of. Okay, well, it's time. We're going to go to the interview here in just a moment, but we do need to mention our first sponsor this week, which are going to be starting with IX Systems. So, of course, the website for that, ixsystems.com/BSD Now. You'll want to go there right now. You can just fill out the little form there and get in touch with one of their sales engineers who can help you design the next system you guys need for your home, your workplace, small, medium, large business. It doesn't matter. They do them all. So everything down from those little FreeNAS minis with the little 8-core add atoms in there that I think, what are the altogether loaded 70, 80 watts with the hard drives. I mean, those things are just really amazing. But of course, all running the latest and greatest Intel processors, so you can take that up to these massive systems we've seen them build in the past, just loaded with cores, or if you want to get a ton of memory in there, they can do that. Of course, their TrueNAS boxes have been extremely popular as of late, too. So if you're big into storage, IX has got you covered.
Yeah.
So
For those that don't know what the TrueNAS is, basically it's a high-end storage system where you'd have two head machines, usually just little 1U rack-mountable machines, that are then connected to multiple shelves of storage, and either head can access those disks, and they work in a failover mode so that when it's time to install that software update, you can install it on one of them and reboot it while the other one's doing all the load from your users. And then once it's back up, you switch over and you can reboot the other one. Basically allow you to have perfect uptime on your storage system, which is very important if you're running all your VMs off of it or something. Right?
Sure, running all your VMs.
Oh, we need to shut down every VM so that we can reboot our storage system to update the operating system. It's like, that's usually not allowed. So, yeah, it provides all the high availability and the best hardware for that.
Yeah, TrueNAS can do that. Of course, things like fiber channels supported as well. So, a lot of little neat things that you'll get over your standard FreeNAS installation. So, definitely good stuff. And of course, IX makes that all possible. And they sell those systems in, of course, spinning disk varieties, a hybrid where it's got some SSDs, and of course, all SSD arrays now too. So, if you want to go all flash, you can do that. But of course, talk to them. Tell them what you're going to do, because the nice thing about IX's sales engineers and those folks is they understand a lot of the technical problems you're facing. And they can help make recommendations based on that. Like, oh, okay, you're running a mail server. This is what you need. Well, maybe you should put more money into your L2 Arc, or maybe you want more into your ZIL if you're on a database. They'll understand those bits and make sure they custom design a solution that's going to work best for you and give you the minimum level and maximum level performance that you need out of the box.
Yep. This week, we're joined by Petra Zeidler, who's a NetBSD developer. Thank you for taking time to talk to us today.
Hello.
Hello. So the first question we always ask people is, how did you first get introduced to Unix and BSD?
It's all the fault of Markus Wild, who in between 1993 and 1994 ported NetBSD to the Amiga. And NetBSD 1.0 came out with Amiga support, and a month after it came out, my Amiga was running NetBSD, and it still is. Which gives us the funny situation that I have a system that could drink beer in the US.
Yes, it's open.
And is older than quite a few of my co-workers.
Yes.
And it still runs my mail service and Usenet use. It's a Usenet a new server. When it started out, it was a UACP node. Of course, UACP is long gone. But if I wanted to, it used to be in the world map as Serpents. And these days it's serpents.de.
Oh. Cool. So you wear many different hats with, between NetBSD and the EuroBSD Foundation and so on. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
When I joined NetBSD as a developer, well, not so much in the function of development. I had gotten an offer to become a developer before, but strictly speaking, I'm not very much into creating stuff. I need to be very relaxed to start fiddling with new stuff. Usually when I do something, it's, wow, this bug dies now.
Yes.
So I was asked by Tracy DeMarco White, who was then the main admin of the NetBSD Foundation, if I didn't like to join admins. And that's what I did. So this is also still the main hat I'm wearing. to be on the admin's team. Usually, if a new account gets created, or if users have problems or things like that, that's usually what I do.
Right.
I also do system updates and make sure that the packages that are installed are not vulnerable as far as possible. Which immediately led to the next hat I'm wearing, being on the package source rallying team. Because there were packages, they had a fix in package source head, and the latest stable release of package source was still vulnerable.
Right.
So you unobtrusively kicked the person who had submitted the fix to head to submit a pull-up, and then do the pull-up, and you can stay on the stable branch with your servers.
Right, and still get the security updates.
Yeah.
Yes, we have only recently finally had something like that in FreeBSD, where you could have the stable branch of ports instead of only having the head.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more convenient to have it that way because
no surprises.
If you have, for example, a Perl update in head, it gets to settle for a while. You don't have the situation that one package got updated and half the packages that depend on it haven't been fixed up to deal with it yet. Which you can get if you have something that is very down low in the dependency chain.
Yes.
So usually you have on the stable branch an economy that works together, which is very useful.
Yes.
Next hat. The NetBSD Foundation differs from the governance of NetBSD differs from FreeBSD. In our core is not elected; it's appointed and usually does not change. Our core is not concerned with membership questions. Core is doing exclusively the technical side.
Right.
Instead, the NetBSD Foundation is much more central. Every person with commit rights is a member of the NetBSD Foundation and as such has voting rights for the board. And the board is responsible for making sure that the various committees are populated, that they are repopulated if they sort of die out, where most committees, the functioning ones, restaff themselves, which is fine if they do it. And of course, board is the one who has to distribute finances and do all the legal stuff. And I had been doing, helping with the board election several times in a row, where we use IETF methods that is, we determine a slate and that gets voted on. I have been involved with that process because someone had to do it, and I have the infrastructure to do it. And and then when I most unwisely was not involved in the voting, I got asked if I couldn't be a board member. This is how I came to be a board member. I've I'm now on my second term as board member. I had a gap between. I hope to get a gap between this term and the next one. And I'm also a member of the security team, which is, in my case, mostly a thing of doing imports for a new OpenSSL and things like that.
Yep.
And then creating the pull-ups to the branches, getting them through. And something where we've been somewhat slacking, but we need to pick up again, create advisories.
Right.
We usually have the problem that fixing it in head, snap.
Yes.
Doing the pull-ups, fairly timely, writing the advisory. Must I?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's currently, another hat I'm also wearing since we're at EuroBSDCon is that I'm the NetBSD representative to the EuroBSDCon Foundation.
Right.
Which, since I visit the conferences and then I'm a board member, and used to be a board member, was practical.
Yes. Cool. So what kind of bits of NetBSD could we blame you for? Do you have any particular piece of it that you had quite a hand in?
I don't actually create much, like I said. What I did create was I was one of the mentors for the IPv6 for NPF. After that was done, we found out a bit later that there was a gap regarding ICMP6, which is not ICMP4 with IPv6 addresses, but actually differs, is its own protocol. So I supplied that part to NPF. And then there's various, I wrote the original MBUF 9 amend page,
right.
But that's a long time ago and it has been replaced completely in the meantime. And apart from that, various fixes more or less around the tree, where one of my interests is networking and IPv6. So if something breaks there, I'm much more likely to say, okay, I'll fix it myself.
Right.
Than, if something broke in the scheduler, I'd be hard put to A, recognize that it did, and B, fix it, because I'm not a computer scientist.
Right.
I'm an astrophysicist by training, and it's not a question that I couldn't understand it, but I don't have the time to actually learn all that I would need to know to get that. And right, everybody who's still at university and misses the opportunity to soak up everything they can get their hands on is missing out.
Yes. It's each particular subsystem has a lot of context that you have to be able to. Yeah. And so it's much easier to focus on one thing that you're.
Professionally, when I met NetBSD, I was working at the Max Planck Institute for Radio Astronomy, officially as a doctoral student, but unofficially I was mostly doing system administration.
Right.
Which also was not so great for my doctoral studies. So I did not finish that thesis. Afterwards, I was at IT Services Company. From there, when the internet started to take off. I had been a board member of the individual network EV, which only was relevant for about 5 or 6 years, but really started off the ability for private persons to have internet access in Germany. And then it went bankrupt when all the commercial entities found out that this actually was a market. And was working at 2 ISPs in the meantime, backbone ISPs, ASR 517 and 1273. After that, when we had the ISP slump and I let go lots of people, I've been at an IT service provider as a Unix admin again. And at the beginning of this year, I started at the German aerospace agency. At the IT engineering group for the Earth Observation Center, which is where all the satellite data from the observation satellites gets collected, archived, very important, and also processed.
Right.
Well, we come in advising people how to get the data from the satellite ground station to our institute, and how to present it securely to other people, but not at all in what algorithms to use to process them and so on. That's their job.
Yes, that's their problem. They're just trying to.
Well, I mean, that's what they're doing research on. We have quite a few research students as well. So, also, of course, that's something that has a high squee factor for a geek.
Yes. But I think a lot of the viewers of the podcast are in a similar position where they're probably mostly sysadmin and maybe we're interested in contributing to a project, but again, they're not going to create the next new subsystem or application.
There's lots of stuff that needs to be done. Immense amounts of housekeeping.
Yes, and just maintenance,
developers
are after the big flashy, sexy thing, like building the next big thing, not keeping the existing stuff working.
Well, there's enough people who also do housekeeping, both in the code and around, but an extra pair of hands is always a good idea.
Yes.
If you take things like, there's a typo in a man page. There's endless stuff, and better, I spent 3 hours understanding what the man page actually says. You could write that better.
Yes.
Documentation is a good entrance drug.
Yes,
because you have the problem that if you understand too much, you don't write good documentation anymore.
Yes, because once you know the system too well, you make too many assumptions and
you take too much for granted.
And so, the FreeBSD Foundation had an intern this summer writing tutorials, and they had never used FreeBSD before.
And that
gave them, they could write a tutorial better than I could, even though I'm so experienced, because they have the same point of view as someone who needs the tutorial.
Yes.
Whereas my view is, when I look at it, I see a lot more, and I see it's almost as if stuff was transparent and I can see through it and what's happening underneath.
Yeah.
And a person approaching it fresh doesn't. Yeah. And it just changes everything.
The other thing is, as an experienced sysadmin, you probably will may already know too much. But you also will know pain points, what itches, what needs to be scratched.
Yep. Because that's what I found very valuable. A conference like this is getting sysadmins and developers together, because developers often are writing these tools and they're like, well, I think this is what a sysadmin would want as the output, or which bits of information they'll need. And a sysadmin is like, well, actually, what I need is this other stuff that you've buried or forgot to include, or truncated, or whatever.
Also, obviously, different environments have different needs, and the greater your span of participants, the wider the reach of what you produce.
Yes.
One of the things I'm doing, quite a lot of things for NetBSD, is that one of my main machines is an Amiga, and supporting the Amiga architecture obviously is putting a strain on the resources. Not a big one usually, only when they update the compiler and toolchain, but it does put on a strain. I'm not good at building compilers. I'm a good sysadmin. I'm basically freeing up other people by supplying the work I'm good at, so that they can do the stuff they are good at and that I want.
That you consume,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more of that than people realize, is that it's about doing what you can in this place so that somebody else can free up to do the part that you want but can't do yourself.
Yeah.
And it's very,
I mean,
it is communal.
If I wanted to actually support the Amiga, I wouldn't be doing anything else, and it's more efficient for the project if I do the things that I do well, that I already do well.
Right, because you don't have to. You can do them at a much greater pace than someone else. And in their turn, they're more familiar with compilers, where you would have to spend a lot of time learning and fighting.
Where I'm one of the things is I get stuff to break that works for everybody else.
That is a special
and
skill.
I have things working perfectly for me, but everybody says, oh, this is so hard and it's not working reliably. And so,
yes, it's fine for me. And part of that's just use case or experience, and sometimes that can be solved with documentation.
It's simply automatic assumptions what not to do.
Yes, sometimes it's just by understanding how to use it, you understand that, well, that was never going to work. Why did you think that would work? It's very interesting to try to consolidate those things and your view versus theirs, and try to think like they're going to think.
But also more people with more difference in background.
Yes, more varied people and people with different experiences. Or, specifically getting more people that aren't the classically trained developer into these projects actually makes the projects that much stronger. Because they can provide that insight and a view and just the different way of thinking. And that's why I think it's very interesting when you get people in the project that say aren't trained in computer science but in astrophysics or something that is provides a very different view of there are a surprising number of physicists around. Yes.
I think it in part because of the training, because if you can get at the source, you can look at the source and see what is supposed to happen. If you can't, and there's still enough closed source that needs tending around, having the physicist mindset of, I have a hypothesis what should work, I try it, it works, great, it doesn't work, okay, let's modify the hypothesis, try again. And not give think I know how it's supposed to work, try it, oh, it doesn't work, I'm playing that now.
Right.
This try again, eventually gives you a result.
Yes.
One of the things that make a good sysadmin is to know what changes, what experiments you can make that you can recover from.
Yes, and also just the iterative step of make one change at a time. So
yes.
that when it does work, you know which change it was that made it work.
Yeah.
That's very important too. But I think the other point you bring up is especially in science, in the end, it's much better if the tools and the things that you use, software you use is open source, because then it's part of the science is you want other people to be able to recreate it.
Absolutely.
You want to be able to kind of prove the process that proved your theory, and if it's a black box,
it's even worse. You don't want to just have one result,
right.
Especially if you do methodology. Mm-hmm. You want to develop the field. Mm-hmm. If you can't give your tools to somebody else, you can't.
Right.
So
and if you can't modify the tools to make them better, then you're not advancing the science.
Yeah. So since most of the people at our institute who are actually doing science are doing methodology, they actually are very huge on diverse geoscience tools. I haven't looked into them. I'm still too stuck up in the other regions that need doing. Maybe that over time I'll develop an interest in that as well. Mm-hmm. But probably not soon. We also have a team which are dedicated developers who look after that.
Right.
So it would be a side interest. Might find me packaging some tools if I ever manage to introduce package source to my job. But that's for the future. Baby steps.
But yeah, that was another important thing is a lot of scientists want to use a set of tools and use them, and it's very important that those be provided as reliable packages so that they can choose to use a platform like NetBSD or ABSD rather than just scientific Linux or whatever, because when they get this R package for doing the math.
One of the advantages of using package source in this case would be that it also runs on other. So you are not dependent on the US and we have a sizable amount of Solaris, for example.
Exactly, and you can use package source on Solaris and the derivatives like Illumos.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think package source is definitely an especially useful place to put that kind of science packages.
Yeah.
All right. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
If you don't have any questions.
I guess you had mentioned in Bulgaria that you have a setup with a telescope connected to a webcam. Does that use BSD at all?
No, I don't have. I have a very small telescope that is that doesn't have an automatic mount, and I have an ordinary webcam, and I put the webcam to the telescope, and I can shoot pictures with that. Simply by using bulk transfers from USB, but I didn't have to do anything special for that.
Right.
It was mostly just working. And since my telescope doesn't have an active mount and doesn't track the stars, I would have to do that manually. Doing any processing with that is not really practical. And the other thing is that the area I'm living in has too much light pollution. Yeah. So observations. If I got to have a vacation that was in a dark place, I could consider packing it and then doing some software processing of the images, doing fast snapshots and then shifting that and things like that.
Okay, we got a news roundup to get to now, but of course, before we do that, we're going to mention our second sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean. Of course, the website for that is digitalocean.com. I think we actually have somebody in the feedback with some questions about running a ZFS in the cloud and what kind of requirements and stuff. So stay tuned for that. We'll discuss that here in a little bit. But as I mentioned, ZFS is available in DigitalOcean, so you can do that now. That's a thing up in the cloud. ZFS running on SSDs. How cool is that? So I definitely want to get signed up over there today. And of course, once you've done that, don't forget to use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, which will give you that $10 credit, which is good for running 2 months basically of their lowest end VM, which is still backed by SSDs. So it's no slouch, but of course you can scale that up to pretty crazy systems. And of course, they even do different types of billing as well. So if you just want to be billed for the actual time it's on, you can do that as well. And then nice API, which lets you script stuff. So you could potentially fire up a builder that maybe builds a couple ports that you need or something and then spins it back down when it's done.
Yes.
So definitely good stuff.
The biggest instance they have and just rent it for a couple hours, run your Petra, and then ditch it.
Yeah, that would actually be interesting. I'd be curious to benchmark that. I should try that sometime, Alan. Maybe do some of the bigger stuff over there. Anyway, man, we got some good hardware here.
Yeah.
Though. Our hardware's no slouch, but it's definitely good stuff. It's neat that they even can offer that kind of capability. So imagine the things you can do with that, and go get signed up today. Make yourself a little account. I know me and Alan both use them for different things, and I'm sure you can find some way that it's good for you to have a FreeBSD instance in the cloud as well. Of course, they support OpenBSD, NetBSD as well, and maybe you need a Linux. We'll give you a pass this one time. So
only
you can do that too if you do. Only the one time, right? If you tell us you're running more than one, there's going to be trouble. But anyway. They do all of that for you, so definitely get in touch with those folks today. Okay, so let's move over to the news roundup. So we have running FreeBSD and Travis CI. It really hasn't been a thing in the past, but I guess some folks are trying to make that happen now, Alan.
Yes,
so
this is quite interesting.
What sort of craziness are they doing? I know I almost threw up in my mouth a little bit. Like, oh my gosh, what are they doing?
Yeah. So
anyway, go ahead.
Evan Rualt, who's a developer working on geospatial stuff, says that Travis CI is the most popular testing framework on GitHub, right? It's like Jenkins, but it's very popular on GitHub. But it doesn't support anything running any of the BSDs, so you can only test the software on Linux. But this didn't discourage Evan, who managed to run FreeBSD in KQEMU on the Linux instance provided by Travis CI.
Okay.
So Travis CI has a free offer for software having public repositories on GitHub. Travis CI provides cloud instances running Linux or Mac OS X to increase portability. He wanted to increase the portability test for his GDAL software, and he wondered if he could somehow possibly run another operating system with Travis CI, for example, FreeBSD. The search led him to the issue on Travis CI's GitHub, but in their bug tracker, but the outcome seems to be that they're not, don't have even long-term plans to support BSDs. He says, one idea that came to me quickly was to use QEMU, the machine emulator that can simulate a full machine, even with different hardware architectures. So he found an existing image of FreeBSD 9.2, which is rather old now, but it was already configured to have a SSH user by default and all the stuff that he wanted. So it was just a quick way to start with testing. Sure. And he configured the Travis job to download that and then install QEMU and fire it up. So then it would fire up the FreeBSD, it would SSH into it, and it would run, /configure make. And it worked. But 50 minutes later, which is the maximum runtime for a Travis CI job, it gets killed, and it was only compiled about 10% of his code. The reason is that when using the pure software emulation mode in QEMU, it involves on-the-fly disassembling the code and then reassembling it because it might be, for example, running ARM code on your x86. Because Travis CI runs in Google Compute Engine, which does not allow nested virtualization, right? Because it's using Linux KVM, but which has some ability to pass through hardware virtualization, but Google doesn't allow it for whatever reason.
Sure.
So the hardware virtualization support available in QEMU, which is KVM, isn't available.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, here comes the time for good old memories and a bit of software archaeology. QEMU was originally started by Fabrice Bellard, who, if you don't know that name yet, he's the guy that created FFmpeg, started QEMU, holds a number of world records for calculating the decimal digits of pi using a standard off-the-shelf computer, ported QEMU into JavaScript so you can actually run the Linux kernel in your browser, and he devised BPG, which is a new compression algorithm based on HVAC, which is going to be possibly a new video codec.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, back in the time when his interest was focused on QEMU, he created KQEMU, which is a kernel module that was available for Linux, Windows, and FreeBSD. Making one code base that does those three as a kernel module must have been lots of fun.
Sure.
That could significantly enhance QEMU's performance when the guest was the same architecture, right? So running x86 on x86 or x86-64 on x86-64. And importantly, it doesn't require any hardware virtualization instructions. KQEMU is mostly from the time before that was really popular. When most computers didn't have that. And originally, KQEMU was closed source, but eventually was open source under the GPL v2.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, says running it on Travis CI was successful too, and he got his entire software suite compiled in 20 minutes, which is well inside that window. So he said that's probably about half the speed of doing it at bare metal, but much better than running it in full QEMU.
Yeah. For a CI job, that's fine.
He tried. So KQEMU has two modes. The one is where run the userland code in KQEMU, and then there's a mode where it actually tries to accelerate the kernel code. That one caused crashing, but he's not sure where. And in particular, KQEMU hasn't been maintained in got to be more than 10 years now. So the fact that he managed to get it compiled on a recent thing that's
pretty amazing.
Well, I think it's still in the FreeBSD ports tree. There's a QEMU and KQEMU, but only half bare metal speed is probably good enough for most people's test suite anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I imagine a lot of the tests people are doing aren't going to take 20, 30 minutes to compile anyway.
Exactly. He said, I could also potentially try VirtualBox instead. As mentioned before, it supports software virtualization with acceleration, but it only allows 32-bit guests on the accelerated mode, and he didn't find a ready-made FreeBSD 32-bit image that you can directly SSH into. I thought don't we offer those on the website? I think so.
I would thought so.
I know we have pre-built images. I don't know if they have SSH on by default, but I think they do for the virtual machines. Anyway, he says for 64-bit guests, VirtualBox requires hardware virtualization be available on the host. And he says, to the best of his knowledge, KQEMU is or was the only solution that could enable acceleration on 64-bit guests without hardware requirements. So that's what he used.
Sure.
But I think it'll be interesting to see if enough people start doing hacks like this. Maybe Travis CI will consider proper support for FreeBSD instead of tying up all their all their Google Cloud instances, running Linux, running QEMU, running FreeBSD.
Or they'll just be jerks and they'll make it a policy thing. You can't use QEMU anymore.
But it seems obvious that people want to run their tests.
Yeah. If people are going to this much trouble to run the tests in FreeBSD, just make it a thing. Come on.
In particular, imagine the gain to the software ecosystem if code people throw up on GitHub was tested in both Linux and FreeBSD.
Yeah, that would be huge. That would be
improves the quality of code everywhere. So,
yeah, definitely good stuff.
Good to have that happen.
Okay, so we have a little bit of EuroBSDCon wrap up here. It looks like some of the OpenBSD papers presented out there have now showed up online. So which ones, did you go to any of these talks, Alan?
Yes, I went to a couple of them.
Okay.
So the first one was by Landry Beroul, who gave a talk about building packages on exotic architectures. Peter Hessler did bidirectional forwarding detection and implementation on OpenBSD. Ingo Swartzy did why and how you ought to keep multi-character support simple, or multi-byte character support. Stefan Sperling did OpenBSD 802.11n. Antoine Jacotot gave the rc.d talk. Mark Espy did retrofitting PrivSep into DVP or DPB, which is their package builder and package add. And Martin Pouchot did embracing the BSD routing table. If you remember, we talked about the changes to the routing code when he posted them on his blog.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Also, I managed to dig up the slides for the opening and closing keynotes. The opening keynote was George Neville Neal looking backwards, the coming decade of BSD, which is a very humorous look at what some predictions of what will happen in the next 10 years, including what was in their world piece, the year of the Linux desktop, terabit networking, some real things and a couple of funny things. OpenBSD, multiprocessor support, all that stuff on a little roadmap. And then the closing keynote, Gerrit Doring did Internet Attacks, Self-Governance, and the Consequences, which was a very interesting talk with quite a bit of discussion at the end about how to deal with these giant denial of service attacks, how to try to prevent the death of all small ISPs and providers, and all that type of thing.
Okay.
Yes.
Definitely good stuff. I think you're working on a similar website for the FreeBSD side.
Yeah. So OpenBSD has this great papers site where they have all the slides from like every conference. You can see all the different events they went to and all the papers that were given, organized by date. It's really nice. So I've, been envious of that for a while. So I started work on a site like that for FreeBSD, but it's got quite a bit of work to be done still. But we're getting there.
Well, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. Well, you have to let us know when you have like a beta of that or something we can go look at.
You can go to papers.freebsd.org right now, but it's not very good.
Okay. All right. Well, go there and then nag Alan and make it better. Yeah. Or send patches. That might even be better.
I'm hoping possibly to put the code for it into a GitHub and allow pull requests for people to add their talks to it. Because I think that'll be the easiest way to get...
Just automate the deployment of it too. Like, so when the pull request comes in, it
the problem is that GitHub doesn't support IPv6.
Oh, okay.
Makes it complicated, but...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Okay, well, moving on here. We have past month or so, VirtualBox in the FreeBSD ports tree got bumped to version 5, which of course brought with it some new features, but it actually caused a regression in the shared folder support. So a FreeBSD developer, Gonzoet, or Alexander, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Timoshenko, he's been tackling this issue in recent days and actually kind of provides us a little peek behind the curtain at some of the challenges involved. Specifically, he started by implementing the various VOPs that were needed. So things like lookup, access, read, dir, read, get ATR, read link, remove, rmdir, symlink, open, close, etc., etc. So he then continued on with the details of kind of how complete this is, though. He says, kind of implemented means that I was able to mount a directory. I'm now able to traverse it, read file, calculate MD5 sums, compare with the host MD5 sum, create and move directories, unzip, zip files, etc. He said, but I doubt it would survive a stress test. He said, locking is all wrong at the moment, and read and write VOPs allocate buffers for every operation. He said the bigger issue that faced, though, is with the rename VOP specifically. He said, I hit a roadblock with the rename VOP. It involves some non-trivial locking code, and also there was a problem with cached paths. So the free VirtualBox hypervisor operates on full paths, so we cache them in VBox FS nodes. But if one of the parent directories is renamed, then all cache names should be modified accordingly. So he said I'm going to tackle these two problems once I have a long enough stretch of time to sit and concentrate on the task. Yeah. So, of course, we wish him luck in getting those issues solved. I know quite a few of our users rely on those. Actually, my folks were complaining about that. They upgraded theirs to 5, and all of a sudden their shared folder went away because they have a Windows VM they run with. Yep. But anyway, hopefully he has success with that, and we'll see that land here soon. Okay, so next up we have FreeBSD issue number 1. Issue number 1 of FreeBSD news from summer of 1997.
Yes.
So who was it who was talked about in that issue?
Yeah,
there,
so this is sadly I apparently didn't load the page previously, so it's loading now.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, there it is. So FreeBSD news issue 1 from summer of 1997 is basically this. It's made to look like it was actually on paper. I think it might have actually been printed on paper because it was 1997. And it's got a bunch of different things, but starts with an interview an article from David Filo, who is the co-founder of Yahoo, and talking about running Yahoo on FreeBSD in the early days. Early days being Pentium 100 megahertz machines with 64 megs of RAM.
Wow.
Now, a Pentium 100 in those days, if you bought it for home, probably came with 8 megabytes of RAM. So 64 was a lot of RAM.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Running FreeBSD 2.0.5. Eventually, they switched to 2.1 stable and 2.2 when they were running Pentium Pros at 200 megahertz with 256 megabytes of RAM.
Nice. Oh, significant upgrade.
No problem saturating our 100 megabit fast Ethernet network. It's like, wow, that was a lot of bandwidth in 1997.
That was.
You know, I had 33.6 kilobits at the time. And so, you know, FreeBSD has been extremely stable. They got 180-day uptimes, serving 4 million HTTP requests per day. All this crazy stuff.
Amazing. So what else did you? I guess Java Development Kit 1.02 was being ported to FreeBSD.
Well, it had been released. Sun ported it to FreeBSD and released it back then. And they were talking about references to some books if you wanted to start learning Java. You know, obviously Java was new. This was Java Development Kit 1.0.2.
Very early days.
An article from Jordan Hubbard, who was the editor of FreeBSD News at the time, talking about, you know, what is FreeBSD? It talks about that, and, you know, who are the FreeBSD projects, so on like that. Then David Grieman from the FreeBSD core team talked about running the busiest public FTP server in the world, cd-rom.com, using FreeBSD. It started life in 1993 as a 486, 66 megahertz with 64 megs of RAM and a 3 gigabyte disk drive connected to a 1.5 megabit T1 line.
Nice.
And a comparatively low 150 user limit. But eventually, you know, switching ISPs, running Pentium Pros overclocked to 233 megahertz, but don't tell anyone that. 512 megabytes of RAM and 139 gigabytes of disk space.
Wow.
You know, I'm still rocking.
That was their whole cache of the internet.
I was rocking my 486, 66 megahertz at that time with 32 megs of RAM and 0.9 gigabytes of disk space.
Right. We were on a Pentium 100 at this point for our system with 16 megs of RAM, I think is what I had it upgraded to, because that was right around the time I'd got a job and like had some money, and we started building these nice machines. It was crazy. There you go.
And then they have the release announcement for FreeBSD 2.2.2, which is fixes bugs in the Adaptec 2940 and 3940 AHC drivers for your disk controllers. NFS v3 is the default. FTPD supports virtual FTP hosting, so different you could chroot into different directories and so on. Numerous security fixes, enhancements to the C++ libraries, user mode PPP daemon, text info docs mechanism, and support for man global. etc sysconfig replaced by etcrc.conf for a more concise customization.
Well, that user mode PPP, you know, let you run KPPP, which was your graphical dial-up. That was fun stuff back in the day.
Yeah, although KPPP sounds just like it's the kernel mode rather than the user mode, right?
Yeah, it was KDE's PPP daemon. Right? Yeah. I remember when we first started PCBSD, we still had people requesting we get that working. I just never, at that point, we had already moved on. Like, I didn't have a modem anymore. It wasn't a thing.
But they have this hilarious ad at the end, leading edge solutions for network graphics software. So XI Graphics, which is funny because it's spelled the other way around. It's a little different.
I know, right?
Which is based in Denver. The leading developer of high-performance graphical software has recently announced the release of CDE, which is the commercial desktop environment. You know, KDE was basically a clone of that. CDE Business Desktop, the first and only integrated desktop for FreeBSD. It has also upgraded its popular Accelerated X server, which is a fully supported commercial-grade X display server. CDE Business Desktop is an easy-to-use operating system. Operating environment. Sorry, they're tricky with the words there. I was going to say, that's not an operating system, it's just an X.
That's right.
Yes. It's an easy-to-use operating environment that provides users with a consistent graphical user interface across workstations, X terminals, and PCs, enabling them to quickly and seamlessly access data and applications from anywhere in the network. This system has the most comprehensive internationalization package available, including all major European languages and Japanese.
Nice.
Accelerated X Server 3.1 is the fastest, most stable, and feature-rich server available, supporting more than 450 different graphic hardware cards. Major enhancements include technology for true color visuals, which I think was 24-bit color.
Fancy.
Instead of 256 colors. Gamma correction and a unique overlay technology for optimal resolution while conserving resources.
Very nice. Very nice. Man, those were simpler days, weren't they? Gee whiz. Well, that's really cool. It's neat to see that. I wonder if maybe people will dig up like issue 2 and 3 if there are other ones.
I tried guessing the file name to see if there was an issue 2, but no.
Oh, well, somebody's going to dig it up. We'll get the link eventually.
Well, you would think the person who was the editor of this might have had them, but maybe not.
You would think. We'll have to ask. Yeah. Maybe at MeetBSD. Okay, we got feedback from you guys. We got Beastie Bits, but of course we need to mention our last sponsor this week, which is going to be TarSnap. Website for that. Come on, it's obvious. It's tarsnap.com. Go to /BSD Now, though, and you can go to our little landing portal there so they know that you're a faithful listener of BSD Now, where you came from. But once you've gone over there, go ahead and create your account and download a client. I mean, we're talking a couple minutes of your time. It doesn't take that long to get set up with TarSnap. You basically are just going to make your account, put a few bucks in there. You'll be amazed how long that lasts you, especially when you're backing up bits which are duplicated often. But once you've gotten set up, you can then go ahead and download a client. So you can get a precompiled client. Of course, if you're on any of the BSDs, it's available via the package systems for that respective BSD. There's packages for Linux. There's Windows stuff. Gosh, they got packages for just about everything. But if you're truly, truly paranoid, this is what's really unique about TarSnap is you can download the source code and compile it yourself. Like, don't just take their word for it being what it is or what they say it's going to be. You can actually compile it yourself and verify it, audit, do everything you need to do to verify it's doing exactly what it claims to, which is backing you up safely and securely and not leaking your data. Your key stays on your side, not on the remote side. So anybody up in the cloud who maybe gains access to the bits don't have anything except an encrypted pool of blah, which is exactly what you want. Means deleting stuff from the cloud, even though you physically can't go remove all the bits, you just have to shred the key, and away it goes. Nobody has access to it anymore.
It's the only way to be sure.
That's right. That's the only way to be sure when you're backing up anything to the cloud these days. So definitely check out TarSnap today. And if you haven't made an account, go ahead and get signed up. Give it a whirl. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Yep. Okay, well, let's go to Beastie Bits here. So first up, we have a call for testing. There's a new MP-Safe NVMe driver. It looks like that's landing in NetBSD. So they're asking folks to come give that a spin. Is there anything particular on the notes here we needed to mention on that?
I think the NVMe stuff really benefits from multiprocessing because that's the whole point of NVMe is actually using 63 concurrent commands being executed on the...
Yeah.
So yeah, they say anyone who has the NVMe hardware, they'd really appreciate checking the driver out and try to punish the drive by doing some heavy I/O tests and parallel loads if possible and report the results.
He also said he did most of the work on emulators since he didn't have the hardware. So definitely want some real testing on hardware if you have it.
Also, if you have SPARC64 hardware in particular, they'd like to try that. They say the driver originated from OpenBSD, where the NVMe is enabled in their generic SPARC64 kernel. So it should work, but no one's from NetBSD has actually reported testing it on SPARC64, so they're not 100% sure yet.
Got NVMe in my SPARC64. Go figure. Nice.
You might need fairly modern systems. Intel's NVMe cards require PCIe Generation 3 to actually work. So don't try it on a SPARC T1.
That's right. Okay, so next up we have a user wrote in. Looks like they're thinking about starting a new BSD users group or bug in Indianapolis, Indiana. So we have a link to that. Looks like they posted over to the Dragonfly BSD mailing list. So if we have any listeners out in the Indianapolis area, maybe go hit up the show notes afterwards, grab that link, and get in touch with those folks. Maybe you guys can get a new bug started out there. That sounds neat.
Well, they posted on the Dragonfly list. Their little splash page actually has the logos for FreeBSD, OpenBSD, and Dragonfly. And it says users group there.
Okay. Oh, very cool. Very cool. We wish them all the luck with that.
Oh, they have the cover of Electronics Magazine from 1982 with Ritchie and Thompson on it.
Oh, good stuff.
Yep.
Okay, so next up we have the cost of forsaking C. It looks like a post over at Bradfield School of Computer Science.
Basically saying, the C programming language is not the trendy thing. It's, the most recent edition of the canonical C text is from 1988, and so on. And, nobody has a logo on their laptop being like, oh yeah, I'm into C, right? But they said the reasons he gives students for teaching them C is, one, it's still the most commonly used language outside of the Bay Area web mobile startup echo chamber. But C's influence can be seen in any modern language. The if statement, that's how I learned my first bit of C. Was every other language I was using did things the same way, right? The for loop, the if statement, and so on. But it says C helps you think like a computer, and more importantly, most tools for writing software are written in C. In particular, that interpreted language you're using, whether it's PHP, Ruby, Python, Perl, whatever. What's that written in? Oh, that's written in C.
Oh, yeah.
And so in particular, he talks about, to actually understand some of those more complicated structures and so on, like in Python, you actually end up reading the C Python implementation closely and seeing how it works. When learning about common data structures like hash maps or dynamic arrays, you need to either implement these ourselves in a language where we can think concretely about memory layout, or just read the implementation that already does it for you. For a student to understand how a Python list or Ruby array works, we have them either write a version from scratch in Ruby or whatever, or just read the source of the standard library implementation in their favorite language, gaining the same level of understanding, but without using C is pretty much impossible.
I'm sure. Okay. Well, definitely check that out.
Yeah.
So next up,
I think it makes a good argument. Lots of people are saying, "Oh, C is dead. It's not safe." It's like, well, the thing you're telling me to write stuff in is written in what?
That's right. And how can you expect more modern languages to show up?
Yeah.
What are we going to have?
Tell everybody not to learn C. Who's going to maintain the languages that we write stuff in?
No. You don't understand, Alan. So we have C. Python's written in C, and then the next interpreter language will be written in Python.
But at some point, somebody has to maintain the C implementation of Python, right?
That's true. No, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, definitely check out that article. He makes a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so next up we have a how-to. The OpenBSD has another UEFI bootloader how-to, and we've covered a couple of these in the past, but specifically this one, of course, talks about how to do dual booting, etc. And let's see here. It goes through the basics, fdisk, how to copy the boot x64 file, and he mentions even how to set up your Xorg. You get a little bonus here, how to use the WSFB driver, since on his particular ThinkPad X250, there's no Intel DRM available yet. So there you go.
You should try TrueOS.
That's right. We have some of those things now. Okay, let's see. What's the next one here? Oh, Michael W. Lucas sets his eyes on OpenBSD's web stack for his next book.
Yes, so it'll be OpenBSD HTTPD, RelayD, CARP, and things like the Acme client, the Let's Encrypt stuff, and all the little bits you need to make your little fast, secure web server.
Nice. Well,
that'll be a nice
I'll look
book.
forward to that one. Okay. Next up, we have a Libre SSL 2.5.0 has been released, so we wanted to give you the heads up on that.
It's interesting there is that they've handled 4 new Cypher Suite groups. So before, you had like medium and high and a couple other things like that. But now they have 4 groups. The first is Secure, which is only allows TLS 1.2 with authenticated ciphers and perfect forward secrecy, or Compat, which is allow any high security ciphers and don't allow the null cipher, or Legacy, which allows high or medium and not the null cipher, or Insecure, which allows everything where the encryption or the authentication is not null. But that seems to be a fairly straightforward way to say, I need to support XP or I don't, basically, and not have to do this, if you've seen the Mozilla recommendations for setting up your Nginx or Apache or whatever, it's like list of ciphers about this long and the order matters and so on. Being able to just say secure and have your SSL library adapt over time to make that the right thing, I
Makes sense.
when Amazon originally did that approach with their S2N, signal to noise library wrapper for SSL, I really like that idea. Although they use dates, so you could set it to modern or
As of
whatever,
this date.
or you could pick what was the thing for that date if you wanted to not have it change from underneath you. But if you wanted it to auto upgrade, you just set it to default or whatever, and it would auto upgrade as the versions went ahead and as things became the right. I think having two options for that, like compat versus secure or something, is also an interesting way to do it.
Good. Yeah, I see they did some things too, like added initial support for iOS. They brought some functions over from boring SSL, some functions that are used by S-Tunnel, for example. So there's some good stuff happening
That's
there.
interesting because that's, I think, the first time they've added new stuff that other than the ABI fixes and so on.
Yeah, that's good. So anyway, check that out. Hopefully that becomes available in more places sooner rather than later. So next up we have OpenSense 16.7.5 has been released. And he has a bunch of patch notes here. Of course, they mentioned that they got the 2 OpenSSL bumps, and then there was a LibreSSL update. But lots of stuff happening there. Looks like they've done some stuff in their captive portal.
The OpenVPN changed to they changed the default Cypress suite after the flaw with 64-byte encryption things. Blowfish and a couple other ciphers were found to be weak because the block size is too small.
Sure. Okay. It's definitely good stuff. We'll go upgrade today if you haven't already. So let's get into feedback and questions. First up this week, we have Jonas, who writes in, says, Alan and Chris, I am new to FreeBSD and was wondering if you could share your perspective regarding the advantages and disadvantages of running ZFS on a $10 a month, 1 CPU, 1 gig of RAM, 30 gig HD from DigitalOcean. He said, from what I read, ZFS needs a lot of hardware resources, of course, RAM and CPU. Does it make sense to run a small VM for web hosting with ZFS? Would it be more efficient and easy on resources to run UFS instead on a small VM? Love the show and thank you.
So ZFS, CPU-wise, doesn't really need that much. Even with the compression, it's really light now because LZ4 is so good. For RAM, 1 gig is really pushing it.
That's bare minimum.
Especially if you want to be able to, run a bunch of instances of your web server and so on. You probably might want to consider upgrading that to the next highest one, the 2 gig of RAM DO instance, or using UFS. But the advantages of ZFS are quite nice. Being able to do the snapshots, the boot environments, the just the general management, knowing that if the thing goes off, that your files are still going to be all there, and you're not going to have to wait for an FSCK. Although with a 30 gigabyte SSD storage thing, you're not too worried about how long the FSCK is going to take. But
definitely not.
I'm a ZFS addict and use it pretty much everywhere now. But 1 gig of RAM is really pushing it. You can do it, but
I wouldn't recommend anything less than 2 personally. That's just me, just so you have that breathing room, so you can have a little bit of arc and enough room to run things and stuff. But that's my personal thought.
Even then,
I have run it on 1 gigs on a netbook once, and that was somewhat painful, but it works.
It's a little better now since if you're running 11, you'll be able to adjust the arc max on the fly instead of having to reboot every time you want to change it. That's going to be a huge improvement when that
definitely
happens.
Okay.
But yes, probably 2 gigs is the minimum for the ZFS stuff. Not so bad if you're ZFSing only the 30 gigs of internal storage. You definitely want more if you're going to use their block storage and have a big pool hanging off the side of your VM.
Definitely. Okay, Jonas, hope that helps you out. So let's see here. So next up is Ricardo. He writes in, says, hi there. I was wondering what would be the best approach to remotely unlock a OpenBSD full encrypted disk headless server. Also, would it be feasible to configure such a server to call home during the boot process and automatically unlock themselves? Keep up the good work. Best regards. Good question. So
that's difficult.
Anytime that is very difficult, and when you automate it, you're just introducing more potential compromises and vulnerabilities as well. Like I don't know. What's your feeling on that, Alan? I'm a little nebulous at doing that.
If I was doing remote headless server like that, the approach I always considered was you have a small not encrypted partition that you boot. And basically this boots up the system and gives you the ability to SSH in to manually mount the encrypted partition, and then start up your web server or whatever you were going to do.
Sure.
Especially now that FreeBSD has what's called reroute support, where you can swap out the root file system. It basically reboots the system without rebooting. You would be able to SSH in, type in the password, and then reroute to that file system as your root file system, and it would boot up normally as if it had booted from the encrypted disk.
Sure.
So that's an option there. The problem is remotely unlocking automatically. It's like, well, then why is it encrypted in the first place?
Sure.
If the bad guy, if the government seizes your server and can just boot it and it unlocks itself, then you've not really accomplished much, have you?
Unless he's thinking he could take the key down off on the remote side or something.
Yeah, but he would have to know, and they would have already booted the server and cloned the hard drive by then, probably, right?
Sure.
It depends what you're defending against. On FreeBSD with the Geli disk encryption, you have the option of using a key file with or without a password, and so you can configure it that way. Although, again, in that case, if the file is just on the computer somewhere or whatever, it's not very helpful. I know at a previous job, Brad Davis had it set up so that the encryption key was on a USB stick hanging out of the back of the server at their data center. And so that way, if the server rebooted, it could boot fine. But when they had to ship the servers between data centers, he could pull out the keys and put them in his pocket, ship the server, and if it got intercepted on the way, nobody could access the encrypted credit cards on it.
Sure.
And then when it got to the other side, he went to the other data center and plugged the key back in. And then the servers were in a locked cage so that the USB stick wasn't accessible.
Wouldn't get touched.
But that's outside of if plan to be physically moving the server through untrusted people or something. I'm not sure how useful that is.
Definitely.
But in the bootloader, you basically don't usually have networking, and it gets quite complicated.
Okay, you want to read the next one here?
Whisker Tickle writes in with a question about storage benchmarking. I'm coming from the Linux world. That explains the nickname.
Yes.
Now I'm running FreeBSD 10.3 on a test rig, and I have almost no idea. I need some noob lube. You probably both already measured your live storage performance throughput with IOTop on Linux. It gives you per process as well as total and actual read-write stats in the bytes per second. One I introduced in FreeBSD on Freenode mentioned the top minus MIO, which says 2,600 unknown units in the right column, while DD Rescue says 80 megabytes per second. So that's what I wanted. GStat is probably your best bet for getting actual IOPS and bytes per second readings, but they are per partition or per geom device, not per process. I think the one in top is just showing the number of syscalls, which may or may not directly relate to IOPS. Seeing 2,600, that's probably a little high for IOPS. It depends on the device. He says maybe there's that one package that I've been unable to find with package search that does something, but how do you measure your zpools? Depending what stats you want, zpool iostat will give you, zpool iostat 1 will print out stats once a second showing read and write IOPS and read and write bytes per second for the whole pool. If you add a minus V, it'll do it per disk in the pool as well. But GStat is also very useful. The top minus MIO one is mostly just to help you figure out which process is causing the IO you're seeing in GStat. So you use GStat, find out, okay, there's a lot of disk IO on this drive, what's causing it, and then top minus MIO helps you point at that process. But I think mostly what you're looking for is GStat, which is geomstat, but also zpool iostat 1 or gpool iostat minus V1 will also give you probably a lot of the stuff you're looking for.
Oh, GStat, by the way, is in the base, so you don't have to package search for that. It should just be there.
And same with zpool command.
Okay, here. Let's see. So the next one here is from Phil. It says, Dear Alan, Chris, and JT, I just wanted to let you know that as a current non-user of the BSD group of operating systems, although hopefully soon to be, your podcast series has been absolutely fascinating to watch and get information from. I particularly enjoyed your interview with Matt Macy regarding the import of the DRM drivers from Linux to FreeBSD, which is of great interest to me as it would enable my Radeon HD 7850 to work. I am a longtime Windows and Linux, Fedora, and LFS mainly user and can code to a reasonably acceptable standard in C, C++, and Java, as well as a bit of PHP and JavaScript. My university degree is about to end, and I chose as my dissertation to write a PlayStation 1 emulator in Java, which uses dynamic recompilation from MIPS machine code to Java bytecode to speed up the emulation. I could have written in my favorite language of all time, C, but I fancied a challenge. Sadly, I've run out of time at the moment, although it now runs commercial software. It's in dire need of optimization. I will be continuing my work therefore in weeks and months to come and perhaps making a port for the ports tree, so who knows. I've been looking to get involved with the free software open source from a coding perspective for a while, and my question has always been where to start. I want to feel like I can make a difference and not worry too much about license zealotry and politics too much. So this is why the FreeBSD project in particular appeals to me, and the fact that the entire base system, including the toolchain, kernel, etc., are developed together as one, means I'm more enthusiastic about getting involved and hopefully getting it running on my machine soon. My degree deadline is next week, and some of the tools I run requires Windows, but after that I want to sit down with the handbook and get FreeBSD running well on my system. Anyway, just so you know, you guys have made a great show and interesting podcast. Keep up the good work. Yeah. Phil, a fan from the UK.
Nice.
Well, thank you, Phil. We appreciate that. It's good to hear. And yeah, if you get your software written up, definitely get it in the ports tree, or at least bug somebody to show you how and help you with that. Because that would be cool to have.
PlayStation games would be awesome.
That's right. That would be very
also,
cool.
If you have gained a lot of knowledge about MIPS machine code and so on, we can definitely use you there as well. I have a bunch of MIPS devices on my desk somewhere here that we could always make better. And
Alan needs more MIPS.
Yeah. I like MIPS. MIPS is fun. It compiles really fast.
It's true. Very true.
But yeah, there's lots of different ways to get involved, whether it's, getting your software ported and working on that, or if you actually want to start working in the base system, running foreign software is a little outside of what you normally do with the base system, but I'm sure if you tell us a bit more about your interests, we can help you find the right project to get started with.
Cool. Okay, you want to read the last one here, Alan, from Luce?
Luce writes in. He asks about a bunch of random disk questions. He says, my first question is about the ZIL and the L2 ARC. I have OwnCloud and Samba serving 15 to 20 people, usually 10 to 15 at a time. Lots of sync between Windows PCs on the LAN and a lot of small files. One of the steel and concrete structure software we use creates 3,000 plus 1 kilobyte files per project folder. The rest of the files vary between a couple of megabytes and some of, as much as 3 to 5 gigabytes. Last time I said I had 4 to 6 new 30 gigabyte SSDs laying around, but I was mistaken. I have 4 new 60 gigabyte SSDs. I've been reading on the FreeNAS manual and forum, and people say that the L2 ARC should not be bigger than 5 times the size of the ARC, since it uses ARC space to store the L2 ARC pointers and so on. I always max the RAM before going to L2 ARC. He says, because if people use too much L2 ARC, it'll decrease the server's performance because all the RAM will be used pointing to the L2 ARC instead of actually caching things in RAM. I thought the ARC was the server's RAM minus 1 gigabyte, but in the FreeNAS GUI, instead of 32 minus 1 gigabytes, ARC says it's 22.9. Yes, I think they tuned it down a bit to be less.
Well, you got to have stuff to run services and stuff too. Samba needs some memory and everything else does.
Oh, there's also, if you're looking at top or whatever, then that's showing you how much of it's being used now, not what the maximum is. There's set of stats, I think is what they call it, right? Anyway, there's commands you can run to get the information. So he says, so I should have maximum L2 ARC between 115 and 155 gigabytes, which means 2 or 3 of the 60 gigabyte SSDs. As I read, people with 12 gigabytes of RAM doing a 300 gigabyte L2 ARC and saying they're getting better performance. It really depends on your hit ratio. If you're reading the same files a lot, then storing fewer files but storing them in RAM will be better. If you're reading so many files that they can't possibly fit in RAM, but they will fit on your L2 ARC, then that'll be slightly better. Although, at some point, if you have a small enough amount of files that it'll make more sense to just create a new array that's just storing the files always on those 4 SSDs, like a RAID 1 of those 4 SSDs, then it may make more sense to store those little files on there. Although, because your workload is mixed with, the 5 gigabyte files mixed in, you probably don't want to do that. But at some point, it might be the thing. The nice thing about L2ARC is it is possible to remove an L2ARC, unlike other disks in the pool. So yeah, you could use 2 or 3 of those really if you wanted to, and basically see what it does. The big thing is, as part of that ZFS-stats tool, there's ZFS-mon, and it shows the cache hit ratios for all the different ones. Running that before you do anything while you're under load and seeing what your cache hit ratios are like, and then maybe add the L2ARC, maybe just one SSD to start and see how it goes. In particular, if you add just one 60 gigabyte SSD and it never gets full, then obviously adding a second one's not going to do you much good.
Sure.
For ZIL, I don't. So the ZIL only affects synchronous writes. The number of simultaneous reads and writes doesn't hurt ZFS because it buffers everything up into RAM and writes it out on the disk in big chunks. Anyway, it's only for databases and stuff where a ZIL will make a difference. Sure. I don't know. I guess OwnCloud probably has like an SQLite database and some stuff in it. But
mine used a MySQL when I configured it.
So in that case, a ZIL might help a little bit.
Yeah, but you'd have to be doing a lot of OwnCloud traffic.
Yeah,
to make it.
I don't know how much does it store in the database? Like, it's not indexing all the files, is it? Or?
No, the files are all on the disk.
Right. So if it's only the settings and the web interface stuff, then the ZIL's probably not.
Yeah, I don't think it's hitting the database that hard at all. Yeah, I haven't seen it on my box anyway.
I think there's a way to tell how many writes you're doing that are synchronous instead of not. Yes, if you run the gstat command, there's a way to see the number of flushes per second. I think that's what you want to tell if you need a ZIL, but probably you don't need a ZIL.
Sure.
Anyway, second question, he says, is it possible or recommended to create a new pool on the same server? Like I mentioned last time, I have 16 hard drive slots in my case on 2 LSI HPAs. Can I use the first 12 to my existing pool, that people work on, and the last 4 slots to create a new pool, with a RAID Z2 or bigger disks, just to back up the files from the first pool? Yes, you can have up to like 80 bazillion pools on a system. It's
only.
Yeah.
Is that an accurate number?
No, I'm making that up. It's it's 2 to the power of 64 or 2 to the power of 128 pools you're allowed to have, which is a number so big it won't fit on your screen. So you're fine to have multiple pools. A lot of my machines do, right? They have a pair of SSDs with the OS on one pool, and then 36 hard drives split up across a bunch of beta in another pool.
That's how FreeNAS is by default too. You have your FreeNAS boot pool and then your actual data pool.
That's what's really nice about FreeNAS. It means if the OS gets screwed up, you just rebuild that pool, and your data pool is still fine. Although less of a problem now that it has boot environments too, right?
True.
And then, do you need L2ARC or ZIL for the backup pool? No. The L2ARC would only be used when you're recovering for the backup tool. And in that case, you're doing big linear reads anyway, so it's fine. You don't need it. And then the ZIL is useless on the backup pool because you're just going to be probably doing ZFS send receive over localhost. And so it'll be fine without it. And third question, he says, in TechSnap, the sysadmin podcast I do, a long time ago, he said he heard Alan and other Chris talking about backups in a feedback question, and the guy took off a hard drive from a server, replaced it with an empty one, took it home and placed it in his FreeNAS server. So after a few disk trips, it would have the same pool on both sides. After that, he would sync over the internet and so on. How can this be done? So if you have a ZFS pool made of mirrors, there's a zpool split command that will let you take one drive out of each of the mirror sets and make a new pool out of it. Or you can do it with replication or something. I think this was done with RAIDs. Yeah, it would have to be mirrors. You can't do it any other way.
Sure.
But that was to basically bootstrap and then use ZFS replication to keep up from the rest. He says, how can this be done? If I take one disk each week, I get one disk first, drop it in my home FreeNAS, and a week after I get another, with the data being a week apart. And, would it restore everything? No, it doesn't work like that with RAID Z. This was using Mir. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I think you might have misunderstood the old episode of TextNap. But we were talking.
It was a different world back then.
But we were talking about basically doing something like your tape swapping, but with hard drives, like your regular tape rotation system, but with hard drives.
Sure.
But the other thing to consider with that is that, the hot swap connectors are only good for so many hot swaps. So it's probably not a good idea to do that with hard drives.
Sure.
Anyway, he says, thanks for your help and keep up the great show. And sorry for all the questions. No, the questions were fine.
No, that's good.
Them. And he says, sorry for the English, but I didn't notice any problems at all.
Yeah, I didn't even know he wasn't a native English speaker until seeing that. So, yeah, good job.
He says, it's all our fault because we placed the BSD itch on him. And now he's, dividing his time.
We'll take the credit for that. That's good. That's a good thing.
Exactly.
We hope to see more of that out of the show. Okay, so as we wrap up the show here today, folks, we want to remind you to send everything in to feedback@bsdnow.tv. So if you have any questions, if you want your question to appear on the show, send it over there so we can get it queued up for a future episode. Comments, if you have any show ideas or topics, maybe you've seen a story floating around the net. I know a lot of these things people just send in, they find them, in their daily internet searches, and me and Alan may not have stumbled across it for years, if ever.
Yeah.
So
I was up until 4:30 the other night trying to debug this bootloader problem. I didn't have time to surf the internet.
That's right. So we appreciate you sending those things in because that's what makes up a lot of the fodder for our future episodes. So keep sending that in to feedback@bsdnow.tv. It's the only place we monitor, so make sure everything goes through there. And we'll look forward to speaking at you same time next week.
And hopefully we'll see some of you at MeetBSD. That's only a month away now. You already missed the discount, so now you have to pay full price for your ticket because you were too slow. But you should go and register, meetbsd.com, and we hope to see everybody there.
Yeah, University of California, Berkeley. I mean, come on. That's going to be really cool.
Matt Ahrens is going to be there. Rod Grimes is going to be there. Chris and I will be there.
Yeah.
Lots of great people.
Yeah. You don't want to mess. If you've been meaning to come to one, make this the one. It's going to be good. So we'll look forward to seeing you there here soon.